quickly see if we can get through this before those other people arrive and tell me what stupid things they want to say. We've asked Dave to look at booth voting to see if it might end up better. Doing both voting would cost $20 million. Did we say and postal?
We've provided costs for both, Your Worship.
Okay. Right, I read it.
Kia ora, councillors. We are recommending that you stay with what we did last time, but enhancing it. You request this repaper in April, so we've just had an opportunity to come back to you now. We have ruled out option 3 as a feasible option due to legislative constraints such that voters outside of Auckland and overseas don't mean to say that that makes it an absolute deal breaker. It's just that that is a fairly important thing just relating to that option. But for all of options 3, 4...
Just a question a little bit on that, because it wasn't that clear to me. Okay. Was that booth voting over the whole period?
Booth voting over the whole period.
What about booth voting on one day?
People who rely on getting their vote in by post.
Oh, they can come back, can't they?
They can, but I would suggest... However, not being able to have out of Auckland voters or overseas voters not able to vote is not a deal breaker. I'm just pointing that out as a particular thing. Well, it'd be a lot cheaper than $12 million, $20 million if you only had it in one day. Sorry, Your Worship.
If we only had booths for one day.
Oh, correct. Yes. The problem is the voter experience. If you can imagine, when you go into general government elections, you are 2 ticks and you're out the door, 5 minutes. That is not the case with voting in local elections. Approximately 20-25 candidates. You have your councillors to vote for and your local board members, and very diligent voters also have licensing trusts in their area. So the average voter takes 30 minutes for a local election. Therefore, we will have queues out the door if we have booth voting for only one day. I suggest to you all, not something we would wish to have. It is very risky, and we would have quite a reputational issue there. The other thing that is the problem with booth voting is that the enrolled voter takes about 30 minutes, but an unenrolled voter, where Auckland has a significant number of unenrolled voters, and this is because Aucklanders are often moving around in metro cities a lot more. So a lot more people don't get their papers, so they have to do a special vote, and often the trend is that they do those on the last day. The last day they suddenly decide they want to vote, they have to do a special vote. If it was booth only or a booth combination, that is a much longer process, up to 40 minutes. The other thing that really concerns both ourselves and Council's independent electoral support, independent election services, is that there's insufficient staff capability and capacity to really make a voter experience anything like a central government experience. We would need, even to be somewhat similar to central government, 630 voting booths, which is not an easy thing logistically for us to stand up. No council in New Zealand has done a booth vote since 1992. We're also concerned that when that happened, the voter turnout went down. That was Hutt City in 1992 with a 26% voter turnout. So whilst it is possible, there are many, many risks to going with booth voting. All voting methods have pluses and minuses, and I think we've done our best to lay those out for you in the attachments. It is our strong advice to you that we enhance the voter experience by having considerably more special voting centres during the voting period. Government has just changed legislation to make it possible for NZ Post to actually get the voting papers out to people, so they've got an extra 6 days, and voters would have an extra 10 days. So they can do that in the privacy of their own home, they can take their time, they can do a considered vote, and with the augmented post return facilities that we provide through Countdown, who we've signed an MOU with for the next election, we've got, I think, the best of all options for a reasonable price. It's my strong recommendation to you, therefore, that you choose option 2, status quo plus. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor has a question, and so does Councillor Fletcher.
Sorry, I've got a biscuit in my mouth. Maybe give me a second. I was just going to say, for public record, could you explain what the special voting centres, the status quo plus for special voting centres means?
Thank you, Councillor. The status quo plus is last time, so we go back to 2019, we had more special voting centres than we did in 2022, but what happened was they only had the voting papers for that area that they were in, and so if people came in to vote and do a special vote, either because they weren't enrolled or they were a new voter, they couldn't get the voting papers that they were eligible for because they'd gone to the wrong centre. So this time, in order to kind of meet our budget, for 2022, what I was going to say, we had fewer special voting centres, but each and every single one of those had a full gamut of papers, so anyone could go anywhere to do a special vote. What we're suggesting is that we ramp that up, so combine kind of the two of those things, so we have more of them and every single centre is fully stocked. So we would have a minimum of 1 per local board, but in larger and more populist local boards, we would have more.
Thanks, Your Worship. I won't speak later, but I support this.
Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you. Rose, you talk about risk of reputation, but on every occasion that we've had the opportunity to consider polling booths vis-a-vis postal, you have come back encouraging the continuation of postal ballots. Can you tell me if that has enhanced the number of voter participation over that time, and has it actually enhanced the experience of Aucklanders and their trust in democracy? Because I feel, and I can speak to it later, but I feel that officers have really put up barriers to going back to polling booths. You have vigorously defended postal ballots, and yet the evidence has been, from my perspective, that it has not increased or enhanced democracy in terms of voter participation. So can you just give us what the facts are on voter participation in recent times with postal ballots?
Thank you, Councillor. That's a very valid question. The voter turnout went up by 0.2%, so it didn't go down, but I realise that that is not a huge and not a great defence of postal voting. What I'm simply saying to you is that the risks with booth voting are very high, so high that I really cannot recommend it. The loss of reputation, but not only that, not being able to give a clear and defensible result on election day, or a timely result for that matter, which is something people always want, is greatly the case with booth voting. So whilst there is no perfect voting system, what I'm recommending to you is the one that has the least risk, is the most known to us, and we can try, again, to tackle the issues with voter turnout by making it very easy and by making, trying to reach into those communities that we typically don't get, and we will continue to do so. But to rely on booth voting as the panacea to low voter turnout is risky in my view.
My second question is there any evidence to show that the public consider local government elections less important than central government elections because it's a postal ballot and because it's stretched out over such a long period of time?
I'm not aware of any research in the New Zealand context, but overseas, and we have looked at this quite a lot, people, there are pros and cons. In the US, they call postal voting home voting, and the real emphasis there is that the voter has an opportunity to make a considered choice and take their time in the privacy of their own home rather than being, queues out the door, having to wait, because that is what I really do worry about with booth voting, is that there will be long queues on the last day, and we will be again blamed for not having enough centres and not being able to cope with the load, because it does seem that people are waiting until the last minute to vote. But at least with postal voting, I recognise that there are problems with that, and I've laid those out really clearly in the report. At least people do have an opportunity to make a considered vote, and if they haven't received their voting papers, they can also make a special vote in a timely manner.
Well, I suggest it's an area that there should be some research in, because anecdotal evidence that I have is that people see that voting in local government elections is somehow less important, and yet the mayor will often say, why isn't Wellington listening to Auckland? Because the issues that we are confronted with are the things that touch people's lives on a daily basis, and we've got to do something better to demonstrate the importance of participation in local elections. And I put it to you that if you just continue with postal ballots, it's just going to be more of the same.
Through the Mayor, we don't have any evidence in that, Councillor, with due respect. The only evidence we have is where Hutt City Council, the voter turnout was 26%.
Okay, bit of silence here. I'll go to Shane Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Does postal voting disadvantage renters, young people, transient people, and what is the extent of that disadvantage?
Yes, it does, and that is a fact of life in a metro city. So the more people move around, the more likely they are not to receive their papers via mail. That is the disadvantage of postal voting. However, they can make a special vote, which is why we recommend having more centres where they can make those votes.
Do you consider that a serious risk in terms of local democracy and actually giving people their voice?
As I said, Councillor, there is no system that is perfect. They might find it too difficult to get to one of the special voting centres that we have. They might find it difficult to get to any voting centre. They might find it difficult to be there on those particular days. There are a number of reasons why people don't vote. I accept what you're saying. I'm just saying that I don't believe that this is the solution to that problem. We cannot fix the electoral roll problem. That is the role of the Electoral Commission. We have given them some suggestions of how they might better capture people who move around a lot more, and I will continue those discussions with them if I'm able.
Thank you.
I'll just add something in on there. So all voting booth places, if we did do booth voting, would not necessarily be special voting places. So whether or not we've got postal or booth, people who need to enrol or change their address or whatever would still need to go to a special voting place.
Thank you. Just one last one, thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to explore the comment around if we did booth voting, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was a contention that we wouldn't get a result on election day, or a reasonable result. I don't really understand that, because we have progress results that come on election day, and then we have more votes that get counted, and it was something like 20%, it was heaps, right? And then we get an updated result. So why would that be any different if we were counting during a booth period and then having, the second count drop? Why would that be any different?
It's simple logistics through the chair. 630 voting booths is what we would have to have even similar voting experience to central government. The logistics of getting all of those last votes in from those booths on the day would mean that those results were delayed. By hours, yes, by half a day, maybe. It's difficult for us to say because we haven't done this before. So the provisional results would be delayed and the final results would be delayed also. And I know that might not seem like a good reason, but people do get very wound up about how long the results are taking. So it becomes a reputational issue. I also believe that we need to take special care not to rush things so that we have a defensible and clear result. And that is going to a lot more logistics getting votes back from 630 locations.
Reserve my right to speak. Thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Wilson, please.
Thanks, Mayor. Just want to ask a couple of questions about security of vote if it's postal. The first one was I noticed in 2 countdowns in our area, and I pointed it out to Councillor Stewart, there was no one supervising the box at all at the front of countdown. Now, when I called Dale Ovnovsky, he said, oh no, there's always somebody if they're at the major counter or someone that's in charge of monitoring to make sure people are not doing anything with it. But I went back specifically to just watch. Nobody was watching that box. Nobody. Absolutely not. And I kept thinking, there's an absolute ballot paper box that can be tampered with without anyone seeing or knowing it.
Through the chair, I don't believe that was what Dale Ovnovsky meant. There was always cameras on the voting ballot boxes, and there's always someone at the main counter, and they're also chained to something that could not be removed. So no one could run off with a booth, you know, with a, ballot box. Thank you, Warwick. Also, they were tamper-proof in that you could only the people who were picking up the votes had the key to get a vote out. So you could put a vote in, but you couldn't get votes out. No one was able to do that. So it's always, always a balancing act here. There is no foolproof way of ensuring that people get exactly the right ballots. You know, we've had people allege that other people were stealing their voting papers, etc. There is pros and cons to every situation, but we did not have any tampered with ballot boxes, and I remain confident that we can keep the security of those boxes. Thank you.
Okay, so the next one I want to do is quite a serious problem. We have a road by the Pakuranga shopping centre, that's on, called Te Rakau, and on the odd side, that is the western side of Te Rakau, every one of the properties had been bought by Auckland Transport several years ago for the Eastern Busway. So AT owned over 100 houses on that side of the road. When our last local body election occurred, those houses were still standing with no one in them, and every one of the letterboxes was full of purple envelopes, stacks of purple envelopes.
5 or 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6, as Councillor Stewart can say. Anybody that had wanted to could have just gone along, because there was no one in those houses. They'd been completely ghosted more than a year ago, because AT had bought the entire lot for the Eastern Busway. But because whoever was registered on the electoral roll had done nothing about anything, there was just ballots to be seen. So I specifically got onto my computer system when I got the data from Ovnovsky after who had voted, and I ran it through to see if anybody in the odd numbers from 1 to 197 of Te Rakau had voted. No one had. So no one had stolen them, but they were just sitting there in the open, letterbox after letterbox. And that seems to me to be something that is terribly fraught with ability to be rorted.
I acknowledge that and have acknowledged that in the report, but there is, if people are voting with those voting papers, there is no way of us knowing that people have used that voting paper fraudulently. But it is impossible for people to vote twice under their own name. Yeah. Again, that is an electoral commission matter, not something we can address, and I recognise your concerns. There is always this problem with people not receiving their voting papers, which is why we're recommending to you that we make it much easier for people to make a special vote, and many people do.
Sorry, but could we not put something through us, because we've got a CCO called AT, could we not do something that said to AT when they acquired properties and they were vacated, they had an obligation to notify the electoral office that nobody lives there anymore?
Through the Chair, those are the sorts of things that we are recommending to the Electoral Commission to overcome that problem. And there are many others, like for instance, when people change their rental situation, that the property managers are able to provide them with, here's all the 10 things that you need to do, and one of those is changing your electoral status, and it is, I've done it myself recently, it takes less than 5 minutes to change online.
Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you. On the back of Councillor Henderson, I understood it was a large number of people voted on the last day. Like, I thought it was more than 20%. I thought it was a large number, though, wasn't it? There was a queue. There was a queue at both the Titirangi Library and the Newland Library on the last day to put their ballots in the box.
There was a queue for special votes, so people who hadn't enrolled. If you got your voting papers, you could stick them in a box, no problem. You could do that in Countdown. You didn't need to go to a voting booth. But what there was were people leaving till the last minute. They didn't get a voting paper and they wanted to vote, so they had to do a special vote. They had to go to those places. So again, our suggestion is that we up the number of those, because that is something that we know people leave to the last moment. So that's still the best option we can offer in those cases.
Okay, so I worry about us devaluing the vote, people's respect for that vote, when we keep trying to make it easier and easier and easier for you, and we'll even chuck in a chocolate fish to try to get you to vote, then the vote becomes worthless in the people's mind, and that's and everything I hear talked about here is about improving voter turnout. So if though, you know, I just think I support the 600 voting booths. I think it's better. I know I see you, a lot of money, but are we here to get the money, or are we here to get democracy? Are we here to get people into this? When I was delivering leaflets around the place, I gave up delivering leaflets because every single one of them went on top of a ballot envelopes in their box. It was point they weren't going to take that out. They weren't going to take my leaflet out. So, yeah.
Through the Chair, it's not on the basis of cost alone. Cost is only one issue that I'm signalling to you as well, that's just a fact. It costs more. But it's the risks that I'm pointing out to you. We do not have the capacity, nor does Independent Election Services have the capacity to staff 630 voting stations, which is what we would need to do to give a similar voting experience to Aucklanders as a central government election. And even then, I do worry that there are going to be queues out the door on the last day because of how long it takes to vote. 30 to 40 minutes, depending on whether you're doing a special vote or an ordinary vote, versus 2 ticks and you're out with the central government. So it's very hard to compare these things. It's a complete unknown, is what I'm saying to you.
Okay, I understand that, but I will stick with my point that we have to not undervalue what that vote is by. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
Fascinating. Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. Just speaking to this, and just around the special voting centres, and I'm asking this question now well in advance. It has been observed in the past that the locations where people vote may have the presence of I can't say parties because, but candidates and the like, and that is of concern. So if we're going to have more of these special voting centres, I'm just putting to you and invite your response, that we need to be far more careful, because otherwise there's certainly a perception of bias. Recently we've had circumstances to do with Mariah's, but equally there are other locations where you've got a presence of some other form that could be perceived to have some influence. So is that something you're going to be taking into account around the special voting centres?
Through the Chair, yes, absolutely. We are are very aware of that, both in a special voting situation or in a booth voting situation. It's particularly true when people are taking a long time to vote. How do you know whether that person's just hanging around taking time to vote or whether they're actually trying to influence people? So we're very aware of that issue, and security is in place in those special voting centres.
The other question I've got is a more general one, and that is, given that we know a substantial number of people don't vote, do we actually do any form of survey or analysis? And it could be random, that's come up quite a bit today. Or it could even be alphabetised, I don't really mind. But a circumstance where we go to some people that we know haven't voted, and that's public, and we conduct a little survey. So why? Do we do that?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely do. And if you look in Appendix A, the single most valid reason for why people don't vote, according to them, is that they don't know the candidates. But the Appendix A lays out all the reasons. Some of them are just not interested in politics, either local or central government. Some of them, sorry, I just need to have a quick read, perhaps it's just gone out of my mind. But that's the main reason, is they simply don't know the candidates. But there's about 5 or 7 reasons there. It's in your report, plus also in Appendix A.
The reason I raised this issue is, as has occurred with other councillors like Councillor Turner, I've made the observation that people don't check their letterbox, the stuff gets wet in their letterbox, there may not be a letterbox, they're not enrolled, and I encounter that sort of thing fairly frequently. And so I would suggest, by way of a question, there are a lot of things that we could do to improve the turnout that are above and beyond this issue that we're dealing with here.
If you're interested, Councillor, 27% of people said I didn't know anything about the candidates. 25% of people said I don't know enough about the policies. 20% I couldn't work out who to vote for. 19% I forgot to vote. 17% I did not know when voting finished and I missed the deadline. 16% I'm not interested in politics or politicians. And 15% I can't be bothered. So when we do this every single time we have an election, we do a post-election survey. And when we are planning our campaign for the next election, this is the primary kind of source of how we might change our communications with the public, knowing these things.
I understand that. I think a question I would ask is, if you're surveying people just on the basis of a list of questions, you often find a significant bias in the response, and quite often there are underlying reasons that the person won't want to admit, but are the real reason why they haven't voted. So I just put that to you, and I would suggest that if you are doing a survey, very careful thought needs to be given to how you craft it. So you actually get the real reason. Because people are sensitive around issues that go to voting because they associate that with power systems and the like.
I acknowledge that, Councillor Walker. My understanding is that this is done by our research unit in a pretty robust manner in response to your point.
It's also before and after, isn't it?
We do before and after, so we take a bit of a test beforehand. The only other thing that I would say is that we know that people who give sometimes reasons, that I didn't know how to vote. We know that sometimes that's not the real reason because we do other bits of research. So a lot of people who say that's the reason that they didn't vote actually just didn't vote.
My last question is, do we have any form of strategy, and I might call it a civic strategy, that endeavours to instil in people an enthusiasm for democracy, a sense of history around the council and the importance of what it does? Any information that conveys the importance of civic places and civic things. Do we have any form of strategy that goes to that?
Yes, we do, and it comes into the fore mainly around the pre-election period, but what we've also realised is that people want to know this information. So we have kind of stuff available for teachers, which is available throughout the term. They can download that for free at any time. It's on our website, ACNU. It's not AK, have your say, it's ACNU. Have a look on there if you're interested. That is where we put most of our civic education material. What we learnt though wasn't just kids and on kids voting. What we understand now is that migrant communities and those who are new to our country want to know about our voting systems and about how council works. Those who do can find all of that material online in very simple and plain language, and we're doing our best through our pre-election campaign to reach migrant communities and all sorts in the way that, not just in the way that we normally do. We learn something every time that we do it, and we improve and just tweak our strategies every time.
My last question, do we feed any information into that silly Orange Man campaign that I really don't rate?
Through the chair, that is not able to be used by local councils. It is intellectual property of the Electoral Commission, so we don't use it. But we are looking through Taituara to have a nationwide campaign in the future to be able to leverage off each other, both costs and also just so that the whole of New Zealand knows that they're voting for their local elections, and it becomes a thing that they start to recognise in the future. So if we can get it going for 2025, that's what we're trying to achieve right now. And the goal is to have something as recognisable as the Orange Man, but not the Orange Man.
Anybody watching this won't be encouraged to bother. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the report. I support it. I think that's awesome that you're looking at special voting centres in each area, because we have a lot of transient because they're in state houses and we're doing state housing redevelopments. So they're having to go out to Manukau to do their special votes because they leave it at the last minute. So thank you for that. Also, I wanted to ask, you know, the turnout is low in lower socioeconomic areas. What about areas that don't have a countdown? What's the opportunity to have drop-off boxes at other supermarkets like Fresh Choice or Pick and Save? Yeah.
Just investigating that with Taituara so that we can actually roll that out across New Zealand, but we're just in early negotiations, and so I hope that we can bring that, because I recognise that countdown isn't the place everybody shops.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. Would you say that possibly one of the reasons why people forget to vote is because the voting time is for 3 weeks, and quite often a lot of people that I speak to, they think 3 weeks is just far too long, and if it was just a week, they get it, and they know that they've got to get that vote, you know, that vote in. But if you're having it spread out over 3 weeks, it just seems to be a little bit too long. And I think that's what I hear. A lot of people have the voting papers on the kitchen table or something, and they've forgotten to vote because they think, oh, I've got 3 weeks to do it. But if they know they've only got a week to do it, they might do it. And the other thing, the other question is, with the special voting, I believe that the special vote's supposed to close at about 12 p.m. And I just wonder why it is that if it closes at 12 p.m, we still have people lining up after 12 p.m, queues and queues, and it could be 7 p.m, and they're still putting them in there. That's what I've heard, so maybe it's not quite right. But if they're not in there by 12 p.m, if they're too late and they're having to queue up and they're going to be 2 p.m. or 3 p.m, or maybe if they haven't got it in by 12 p.m, it's too late.
Through the chair, in answer to your first question, no, there is no research that suggests that people having a week might vote more than if they had 3 weeks. But what I do know is you're exactly right. There were people queuing out the door at midday. No vote. What we did was at 12 p.m, anyone who was in the building could come into the foyer. We could fit them into the foyer and they were there. We processed their votes. At that 12 o'clock period, the doors closed. Anyone who wasn't in the building, their votes were not taken. It would be against the law for us to do so. So I do know, though, that people take to the very last minute sometimes before they decide to vote. So I would suggest that having a short period of time might make that a little bit more intense. So hence the reason why we're suggesting to have a deal more special voting centres in the status quo plus option, so that people have not only more time, because the legislation's changed to allow an extra 10 days, 6 additional days for New Zealand Post to get the votes into the letterbox, or the postal documents into the people's letterboxes, but we've got 10 additional days now in legislation, so 32.5 days to vote, on top of having more special voting centres. It will be very difficult if people say they didn't have an opportunity to vote.
With that, Deputy Mayor Simpson and then Councillor Leone, and no, I don't have anything else.
Thank you. Could you tell me, do we have to have the voting during school holidays?
The electoral period is prescribed in legislation.
I think that's an issue, you know, it's people do go away, and so I think if we can't do anything about it, thanks, that's all I really wanted to know.
Oh, we've got a bit of a kerfuffle going on, so I'm going to move this, and it'll be seconded by. Do you want to amend it? So. Okay, that's jolly good on you, rightio. Thank you for that. Now, Councillor Leone is next, correct?
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to put up an amendment. The first is option 5, the combination booth and postal voting, which is 30 places per local board over 7 days. And I know that there's an increased cost on that, quite a specific increased cost of around 10 million, but I'd like to put that up first, and if that fails, I'd like to put up option 4, the combination of postal voting with both voting on election day, which would mean that we'd have postal with 20 places per local board on election day. And the reason why I'm wanting to put those up is because I've heard the concerns raised here around accessibility and the fact that we know that there is higher turnout with voting booths, and we know that from general election because we get around 80% turnout. So I would like to put that up as an amendment.
You've got it.
Happy to second the amendment.
The rules person says you can put up one amendment. So the amendment you're putting up is option 4, is it? Option 5, is it? Option 5, sorry, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Righto, we've got an amendment for option 5, which is $17 million, and we've got the basic one is $10 million worth of voting on option 2. So we'll have questions about option 5. That's pretty obvious. Okay, and then we'll have debate about option 5, and we'll vote on option 5, and if it wins, and if it doesn't.
Just want to ask Councillor Leone, if you have a hybrid of a mailing system and you can do it at polling places, are you saying that at the booths all you would do is bring your papers with you and submit them? There wouldn't be papers issued to you in the booth, because then you could have people having them all sent out to them in the mail and then going to a booth and getting voting papers.
Option 5 is a combination of booth and postal voting.
Yeah, but yeah. What happens to the papers for voting? Do we send them out to everybody? And if you want to vote in a booth, you have to bring your papers from home to fill them out and vote there? Or can you go to the booth and actually get new papers, given that you might already have voting papers at home?
Well, I think that would have to be something that's answered by staff. I mean, in terms of the detail of that, I'm just looking on page 40 of our information and looking at that detail there. So, as I've said, my whole goal is to provide options today around more voting booths, which is why I've said I would like to put that up as a first option, and if that fails, then to look at option 4, which is the combination of postal voting with booth voting on election day, with 20 places per local board. So the first option, option 5, sorry, is 30 places per local board over 7 days.
Rightio, well, I've got a question. Where's the $7 million coming from?
If I might just interrupt for a second. So staff have advised me, Councillor Williamson, that the way this would work, and please correct me if I get this wrong, the way this would work is that everyone would get their postal ballot votes, but if and when they turned up at a ballot box to vote, there would be separate papers there for them to use for that purpose.
So you could have now a plethora of 2 lots of voting papers per person. One at home and one at the polling booth.
Vote early and vote often.
We might invite them to, might just invite Rose up to the table because I've just repeated what I was advised.
Craig Taylor with me from Independent Election Services. I understand your question that you think people might be able to vote twice?
No, I understand that you'll do some checking later on to see if someone, but I'm just talking about how many voting papers are sitting out there. If you delivered them to everybody via mail, and then you could go into a polling place whenever you want and vote again on some papers. You've got blank papers sitting at home. You could have multitude of blank papers sitting out there.
Yes. So there's no real problem with that, though, as long as people only vote once and we only count one vote, which we do, as you say, mop up at the end.
Okay.
So if people attempt to vote twice, they can't.
So each voting paper is a specific, it's got its own by.
Through the chair, I think that's barcode, is it, Craig? Correct, yes, a barcode.
Oh, that's a shame. Can't vote early and vote often. Like Chicago. All right. Thank you for those questions. I don't know. Can we get on with it just and vote on whether we want to have the amendment?
What's your question?
Oh, where's the money come from? I don't know. I have to ask Phil that. Where's your $7 million come from? Have you budgeted with 10?
Well, the officer reports very clear and to be clear, it's an estimated cost contained in there. We will have to come back to you with more detail around that. But for the purposes of today, if you think in terms of the numbers indicated in the paper, this is additional cost and will need to be funded in due course if you go down that path.
No swings and foe. Councillor Lee.
I'll be brief, Mr Mayor. I just want to make a comment. The council is under a certain amount of pressure to ensure that voter participation is improved. I think there's a reference in the Local Government Act. But that requires a certain amount of judicious prudence and discretion when it comes to the council being involved in actual elections. The fall off in voter participation is no secret. The council and the discussion today tends to focus on the mechanics of voting as a contributory reason, if not the main reason, which I disagree with. I think the reason why people don't vote is that they're turned off by the council, not just this one, local government in general. And you can pick up a news media article any day in any part of New Zealand where there's controversy and disgruntled citizens concerned about the performance of their councils. So in many respects, in my opinion, the main contributory cause for the decline and turning off of voters is the performance of councils under this particular regime, post-1989 regime. Be that as it may, in terms of the mechanics of voting, there are some strange inconsistencies between central government and local government voting. The standard election day where the vote is, by legend, around the world in democracy, secret and private, personal. In local government voting can often be family affairs as people open and pour over their ballot papers. In terms of electoral advertising in general elections, election material must be disappeared on voting day. In local government elections, signs are everywhere while people are voting, except for the last day, which is the only thing that is consistent with the general election. In terms of council staff participation in helping get out the vote, that's getting very close to being involved in election campaigning. And there has been occasions where council staff, candidates, political activist groups are with voters, particularly in the case of university students, and in the case, another example of people in homes, senior homes, and in the case of the homeless. So my request is, I can understand why the council staff are under some pressure to improve the voter turnout. I think a great deal of discretion needs to be exercised, that the council staff are not inadvertently involving themselves in political campaigns by one political faction or political activist group or another. I'll just make that point. Thank you very much.
Very well made, Councillor. I thoroughly enjoyed every part of it and agree with it. I'm just having a little thing here. I've just had a quick look. If we went from the option 2, which is the one that staff have recommended, to the one that is being put up as an option, there's an additional $7 million of charges. There's another 10 by 70 days of additional exposure. In order to get 10,000 additional votes, you'd need to have 130 extra people who weren't going to vote every day in those ones, which is probably pushing it. And if you get an extra 10,000 voters, that would be $700 per voter. Well, that's bloody ridiculous. I think you could buy a few votes for $700 per vote. So I will definitely oppose the increase, because it's just throwing money out the window. But Julie Ferry, you seconded this, and you're going to explain why it's such a good investment. Although I think I've made it fairly hard for you.
Get what you're saying. Okay. So I guess I do support this and have seconded it to that effect. I think for me, I'm actually really concerned about some of the questions I've heard asked, some of the views that have been put forward about, being worried about if it's too easy to vote, people won't value their vote. I think all of what we are doing here with this item should be focused on increasing turnout. And I make no bones about that. I think that's absolutely should be the democratic goal of this organisation, to have as many people vote as possible. We heard last time, the interest in the special voting centres, and I had several in my community where they did run out of papers. And also the turnout on the last day with people going in to put their votes into the library boxes and supermarket boxes suggests a strong interest actually in both voting. Historically, the international research, and this is from memory going back a while, so it may have been superseded, but is generally that postal voting is usually a good option, it gets a better turnout, except when it comes to general elections. But I think what we're seeing is a real shift now to people wanting to have a voting day. And certainly I know that one of the 20% voting on the last day last time kind of, I think, bears that out. To that end, we need boosts in order to achieve that. So I strongly support this. But I did, the cost issue, this is one of the most important things that we do actually, is paying for an election. So I'm not particularly bothered about the idea that we might invest more money in making voting more accessible and making democracy more accessible for our community. I think that's absolutely what we should do. And I think the cost is possibly relatively modest. I'd like to see a little bit more on that, because if we have more mandate as politicians at the table, if we can be more sure of we're here with a strong mandate, then a lot of other processes potentially will go a little bit smoother for the council. I'm also really worried about the suggestion we give people less time to vote. You know, we should make this as easy as possible and get as many people participating as possible. This is grassroots democracy. This is, how can we be representatives if we are not enabling people to vote for a representative? So I strongly support booth and postal voting as put forward in option 5. And if we do end up going with option 2, status quo plus, then, you know, that will be an improvement on status quo. But I think we're potentially missing an opportunity here to really make a step change, that people are losing confidence in democracy and wanting more of a say. And this is one way we can make a step forward in that area. Thank you.
Okay, I've got one from Henderson, then I'm going to put the amendment, then I'm going to put the thing.
Sorry, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll be really quick. Look, I'd consider the mayoralty of Auckland to be the second most important political job in the country, maybe the third after the Minister of Finance. We're talking about the amount of money in terms of investment. We need to invest in that. It's directly elected. You know, some of the things we're discussing around maybe we'll have to wait a bit longer for the vote. Well, that's cool with me. No issue. I usually hike on election day and it's lovely. Honestly, there are serious distortions to what we do here, and it gets worse every 3 years as the postal system gets run down and also gets out of favour in terms of the modern world. People in transient households, people that rent, people that are young, we shouldn't have structural disadvantages to how we elect such an important office and the officers around the table as well. So I just wanted to lend support to that, and I'm sorry, I'll try to be as quick as I could. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to put the amendment.
Division's been called by Councillor Foley.
Division's been called by somebody.
Councillor Foley.
Councillor Foley. Rightio, we're going to do an alphabetical non-randomised division. Call Sandra with an R. We'll start with Baker with a B.
Councillors, you're voting on Councillor Leone's amendment. Councillor Baker.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Ferry.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Against.
Councillor Foley.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
For, thanks.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Lee. Councillor Leone.
For.
Councillor Newman.
No.
Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. No? Is that no? Councillor Stewart.
No.
Councillor Turner.
For.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
No.
Councillor Williamson.
No.
Mayor Brown.
No.
What have we got? That's lost 10 votes to 11. So now you're back to the original.
Okay, now we're back to the original. You can't have two.
No, I'm sorry, Councillor Leone, you cannot move another amendment.
I'll move another amendment then, but I don't think we need to debate again, if that's okay, which is for option 4. instead of option 5, which is booth on the day and postal.
Seconder?
Second. Councillor Foley, second.
Righto, we've had a debate on this. We'll go for this one. This is now for option 4. 20 places per local board on election day. Yeah, it's not quite so bad. Does anyone want to do one of those divisions?
Division.
Who said that?
Councillor Foley.
You've been very divisive for a person who hasn't bothered to rock up today, Councillor. Right, off we go. Here we go.
Councillors, you're voting on Councillor Ferry's amendment, which is for option 4. Councillor Baker.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
No.
Councillor Dalton.
4.
Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Ferry. 4. Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
No.
Councillor Foley.
4.
Councillor Henderson.
4. Thank you.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, please.
Councillor Lee. Aye. Councillor Leone.
4.
Councillor Newman.
No.
Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
No.
Councillor Turner.
Against.
Councillor Walker.
No.
Councillor Watson. Councillor Williamson.
No.
Mayor Brown.
No.
That one is lost. 9 votes to 12.
I think we'll move the original thing, please. Okay, I'm going to go to the substantial, the one the staff have recommended after all that work. We'll now vote on that.
Your Worship, just to avoid time, I'm not going to put an amendment up, but I want to make it clear that my preference is to go to polling booths in line with central government. And so rather than wasting the time of the committee, because I know that there is not an appetite for it, I'm just expressing my preference now.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. That's not one of the options, but I'd like to go back to the old days. We did that as well, but that's not on the option. So we're going to vote for the recommendation from the staff. Do I dare go all those in favour or not? Yes. All those in favour?
By division, please.
Bloody hell, who was that?
Councillor Fletcher.
That was Fletcher, and I'm not wasting your time with an amendment.
Okay, good on you. Apologies. I just didn't hear the name, that's all.
Councillors, you're voting on the original motion. Councillor Baker.
4.
Councillor Bartley.
4.
Councillor Dalton.
4.
Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Ferry.
4.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
No.
Councillor Foley.
4.
Councillor Henderson.
Abstain.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, we've got yes.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Leone.
4.
Councillor Newman.
Yes.
Councillor Sayers.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson. Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Mayor Brown.
Yes, please.
That'll be carried 19 votes to 1 with 1 abstention.
Bingo. Well, I'm glad we stopped for lunch before we got to that. I'd like you to move on to item 13, which is response to the Ombudsman's